Hello and welcome to Roadmap 2019. This is the platform where we interact with major stakeholders in Nigeria's 2019 general elections. I am Ladi Akeredoluale. Thanks for joining us. The elections, first postponed, have now taken place, and there have been many twists and turns at various levels, bringing with them issues to be addressed going forward. What are the lessons to be learned from this exercise so that in the future, better, faster, and more satisfying results can be accomplished? My guest on today's edition of the program says a wide-ranging dialogue must be held to tackle what are seen as major challenges in the electoral processes, such as inconclusive polls, manual collation, diaspora voting, party formation, and internal democracy, the role of judicial interventions, campaign financing, electoral offenses, the role of security agencies in elections, and a lot more. Please do join us as we talk to the electoral umpire in the 2019 general election, the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, Professor Mahmood Yakubu. Professor Yakubu, thank you so much for your time. I know this is a very busy period for you. We're very grateful for the opportunity.
My pleasure, Ladi.
I want to start with this issue of diaspora voting. In our last interaction, I did ask you about it, and you explained that the framework is not there, the legal framework in particular is not there. But it reared its head again because just around the time Nigeria was holding its presidential election, Senegal was doing a similar thing. And Senegalese in 49 different countries voted in that election. Provisions were made for them to do so. It raised the question again that why is Nigeria so difficult and all of that? Now, if you look at it with your experience, being in the driver's seat during this period, what, apart from the legal framework, is holding up the process?
Okay, let me say this. I have a little advantage in my capacity as president of the ECOWAS Network of Electoral Commissions.
It's part of the reason why I'm asking you the question.
I think it's the issue of jurisdiction. Remember, in terms of linguistic classification or blocks, we have three linguistic blocks in the sub-region. You have the Anglophone, you have the Francophone, and you have the Lusophone, the Portuguese-speaking countries, essentially Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. In virtually all countries outside the Anglophone, they have a robust system of diaspora voting. And not only do their citizens residing outside their countries vote, but in some of these countries, they also have what they call overseas constituencies. So when they conduct elections, there are 5 representatives of overseas constituencies that sit in their national assemblies. I know that that is what happens in Niger Republic. Each continent of the world elects 1 member to represent them in the national parliament in Niamey. So the Francophone have their own tradition of doing things. I recall that when Senegal conducted a referendum not too long ago, Senegalese living in Nigeria actually voted. And interestingly, we provided them with the voting cubicles and ballot boxes. And it also happened with citizens of Niger Republic and Benin Republic also. In Cape Verde, which is one of the Lusophone countries, actually citizens in diaspora vote. What is interesting about Cape Verde is that they have more voters in diaspora than in country, because there are more citizens of Cape Verde living outside Cape Verde than on the island. But in West Africa, I'm unsure if there is any Anglophone country that has a robust system of diaspora voting. Ghana doesn't have. I'm unsure if Sierra Leone has, or Gambia has, or Liberia. So it is that partially explains why we don't have diaspora voting. But for us as a commission, we believe that the time has come for Nigerians residing outside the country to vote in our elections. Yes, there will be issues of logistics and what have you, and particularly for a country like Nigeria, where only God knows how many Nigerians live outside the country. Kenya tried it, in their new constitution to allow citizens living outside the country to vote. But eventually, the Electoral Commission had to approach the Supreme Court to define the parameters for the commencement of diaspora voting. So they started with the neighboring countries. They included South Africa, then Tanzania, Uganda. So it is just a matter of time when Nigeria joins. But now the major constraint is the enabling law. As long as the legal environment remains what it is, where citizens only vote where they are registered, and Nigerian citizens are not registered out of the country, then there has to be an amendment to the legal framework to enable that happen in Nigeria. Remember also, even within Nigeria, you can only vote where you are registered. If, for instance, you are registered in Abuja and on an election day you are in Lagos, you can't vote for that reason. Or even if you are registered in a part of Abuja, say in Kwali Area Council, for instance, and you happen to be in Buari, you can't vote. You have to go to the place where you are registered, even though the law provides for a mechanism of transferring your registration in order to vote. So I've been asked this question many times about diaspora voting. I said anybody who thinks that the Commission should think in that direction is actually preaching to the converted. We believe that that should be done, but election is about laws. And for as long as the laws remain what they are, we cannot conduct diaspora voting. But it's just a matter of time, I'm absolutely sure, that the law will be amended to allow Nigerians living outside the country to vote. And they deserve to vote in our elections. But now they have to come to the country to vote in country. But it should be made easy for them to vote where they reside outside the country. And also citizens who are living in other parts of the country other than where they are registered to also be able to vote. And also election duty personnel, military personnel, don't vote on election day because they serve in places other than where they are registered. So there should be that flexibility to allow even citizens within the country that don't vote for the reason I've mentioned to be able to vote. But I believe it is a matter of time, and I also believe that for us in the Commission, we are convinced that that is the way to go. When will that happen? It's up to the lawmakers to amend the law to give the Commission the go-ahead to do so. Interestingly, we have been thinking about that as a Commission, and we came up with a framework for IDP voting. In case the legislation, the law is amended, we will be able to conduct diaspora voting. But there is a lot to do. There is a lot of study to undertake. There is a lot of thinking to do. It will involve a lot of cost. If you have Nigerians living in North America, for instance, you are not going to spend the naira to conduct voter registration and to conduct elections. You will spend the dollar. If they're in Europe, it's the euro. If they're in the UK, it's the pounds. So it's going to be costly. I'm absolutely certain in my mind. But I also understand the enormous benefits of allowing Nigerians in the diaspora to vote. It will come in the long run. But now, the major constraint is the law. The law should be amended to allow for that to happen and to also allow political parties to campaign and raise funds outside Nigeria, which is not permitted under the current law. So that is why when Nigerian politicians go abroad, they don't say they are campaigning among Nigerians in the diaspora. They say they are speaking to the Nigerian community because the law does not allow for campaigns outside the country.
That brings me to the big L, what some of my colleagues have called the big L, the issue of logistics. Elections can be everything, but without the logistics, it's, as this series of elections in fact proved. You've received criticism over the issue of logistics, but as someone I spoke to during the course of the run-up to the postponed date pointed out that Nigeria has its own peculiarities. I want you to talk a bit more about what were those challenges, and with the benefit of the experience you had, how can they best be addressed as we move forward?
I think the first point to make is not to talk about logistics. The first point to make is not to talk about logistics, but to talk about the extensive responsibilities of the Commission. First, yes, the country is big, 84 million registered voters. The voter population in Nigeria is more than the combined populations of Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal put together. It's more than that. That is the total number of registered voters. Secondly, consider the extensive responsibilities of the Commission. Take the issue of political parties as an example. INEC registers associations as political parties. The Commission regulates the political parties, meaning that we regulate campaign spending, we monitor their congresses, conventions, primaries, and meetings. We also are saddled with a lot of election litigation arising from congresses, primaries, and conventions. That alone is a Herculean task for the Commission to perform. Secondly, the Commission is charged with the responsibility of prosecuting electoral offenders. We conduct elections. On top of that, we are also saddled with the responsibility of electoral logistics. I know Nigerians are always quick to point to the experience of other countries where elections are conducted, results turned out speedily. For instance, about the time we were conducting our elections in Nigeria, Senegal conducted its own election. What is the voter population in Senegal? 8 million. Nigeria's voter population is 10 times more than Senegal. But in many Francophone countries in our sub-region, the Electoral Commission is not responsible for the delivery of electoral logistics. Usually that is left to the Ministry of Interior to deliver electoral logistics. In many of these countries, they have a different body responsible for the registration and regulation of political parties. That is not the case here. In some of these countries, you are not saddled with the responsibility of prosecuting electoral offenders. That is not the case in our own jurisdiction. So if, for instance, the Electoral Commission in Nigeria is only saddled with the responsibility of conducting elections, I will just focus on the conduct of elections. But we are responsible for everything. The voter population keeps increasing. The system is still essentially manual because of the legal framework. Movement of results from the polling units to the wards to the collation and declaration centers is still done manually. And there are instruments that we have to complete. There are forms. The entire election is conducted on the basis of the total number of registered voters. So to give you an example, for the 2019 general elections, in the area of ballot papers alone, we printed 421.7 million ballot papers. For the result sheets for the presidential election alone, we printed 13.6 million sheets. And as you saw during the collation, it's a very broad document that will take a long time to complete. And then the law also said that you give duplicate copies of the result sheet at every level to agents of political parties. And so you had to complete the forms 73 times for the presidential elections for the candidates that contested in the elections. So the task of conducting elections in this country is enormous. Secondly, election is the biggest logistical undertaking that any nation can embark upon in peacetime. Somebody says, with the exception of war, but I dare say that even in wartime, it's not the entire country that is engulfed in war. It's a particular part of the country. But you are expected to get to every nook and cranny of this country. Consider the fact that we have over 176,000 polling units and voting points. You have to reach all these polling units and voting points such that elections are conducted around the same time nationwide. It's a huge, huge undertaking. So going forward, I said when I tried to explain to Nigerian citizens the reason why we had to reschedule the elections by a week because of logistics, that we need a big conversation in this country about the conduct of elections. This conversation must start immediately after the elections. Because by 2023, the voter population may reach 100 million. And only God knows how many political parties will be registered by that time. And you have to make provision for every political party and for every voter. The sheer amount of paper that you move up and down the country is simply amazing. And so there will continue to be these logistical challenges. Recall that it happened in 2011 when the commission discovered that the result sheets were actually not available within the country on election day. The election was suspended after it has commenced. We were confident and so hopeful that we'll be able to pull that one through. And that's why we kept hoping against hope and working hard to ensure that we deliver the electoral logistics to enable us conduct the elections without having to adjust dates. But eventually, it proved impossible. We explained this to Nigerians as honestly as we can, and we also apologized to Nigerians for what happened. And then we remobilized and ensured that we conducted the elections within a period of 7 days, as promised. But again, learning from that experience, because we have 2 weeks between the national election and state elections, we then went to work. As we are conducting the elections, we are also busy moving materials for the election holding on Saturday. And the election holding on Saturday, in terms of constituencies, is more than twice the size of constituencies for the one that we conducted earlier. And as I told you earlier, we have successfully delivered on this electoral logistics. So it goes to the heart of the matter. In 2008, 2009, the government of the day set up the WISE Committee. WISE Committee made a number of recommendations on electoral reforms. How many of these recommendations have been implemented to date? 2011, recall the post-election violence. The government of the day set up the Sheikh Lemu Committee. Sheikh Lemu Committee made extensive recommendations. There is even a white paper. But where are all these recommendations? But even the present administration actually set up the Ken Namani Committee on Electoral Reform. The Ken Namani Committee made a submission. I learned that there is an executive bill going to the National Assembly on the establishment of the Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal. And also I learned that some senators have sponsored, like private members, bills for that to happen. We hope that at the end of the day, all this initiative will see the light of day. But it's not that recommendations have not been made on how we can make the electoral system better. But we have not had the political will to implement some of these recommendations. And then when we come face to face with the reality that we face of an electoral commission in Abuja made up of 12 commissioners and a chairman, then 37 resident electoral commissioners in the states, saddled with the responsibility of conducting elections for a country like ours, which is huge in size, huge in populations, and with all the deficiencies in infrastructure, then we need to have a big conversation around the conduct of elections. We are always quick to point out to the United States, for instance. I had the opportunity of visiting the Federal Electoral Commission in the US. Interestingly, it's the only electoral commission in the world that does not conduct any elections at all. The states conduct elections in the US. What the Federal Electoral Commission does is to look at campaign finance and enforcement of campaign finance laws. And you visit other countries and also see the way elections are conducted compared to the way we conduct elections. I think there is need for a major conversation in this country about how we conduct our elections. And I hope this conversation starts immediately after we are done with the state elections. We need that conversation in the interest of our electoral process.
That raises the issue of ad hoc staff. When you mention the number of commissioners, yourself, the number of men who are full-time staff of the commission and who have institutional knowledge and so on. When it comes to election time, you've got to bring in these people, broadly called the ad hoc staff, who actually are the foot soldiers in many instances on the election day. Many have said they themselves constitute a cog for the commission because for the most part, they don't have any stake in the success or otherwise of the project. That because they come in, they probably get paid a stipend, they do the job for a day or two, and they're gone until maybe the next election cycle. Is there any way out of that?
Well, I don't know any electoral commission in the world that conducts elections on the strength of its own staff. It's simply impossible. For this election, if you take the ad hoc staff from presiding officers to supervisory presiding officers, collation officers, returning officers, the RA technical support, we engage about 1 million Nigerians for election duty. There is no way you can have an independent electoral commission made up of 1 million staff that will participate in an election once every 4 years or as the need arises. We have a staff strength of a little over 16,000 in the commission, and look at the size of the country. So there is no way we can conduct elections on the basis of our own staff strength, so we go for ad hoc staff. In India, for instance, where hundreds of millions of citizens go to the polls,
900 million.
The election is basically conducted by the Indian civil service. It's civil servants that conduct elections in India. They have an electoral commission of only the chairman and 2 national commissioners in Delhi. Then they have commissioners at state level. And then the secretary of the commission is a full-time civil servant. After his tenure, he goes back to his position in government. The last person I met as the secretary to the commission was actually an official of the Ministry of Agriculture. And he went back to the Ministry of Agri. So the civil servants conduct the elections. How are they remunerated? They get the equivalent of their 1 month's salary for the election duty that they perform. Even if the election goes beyond 1 month, they only get salary for just a month. An Indian election is sometimes very difficult to observe because it's not an election conducted in a day or 2. It's conducted over a month. Essentially, again, in order for them to move security from one part of the country to another part to conduct elections. It's a huge logistical undertaking. But so for that reason, we cannot in Nigeria say we are going to conduct elections on the basis of our own staff strength. We engage ad hoc staff. We are fortunate in Nigeria because the core of ad hoc staff are drawn from young Nigerians engaged in the National Youth Service. And for that reason, you can easily engage them. They have addresses. In the event of violations or malpractice, you can deal with the situation because they need to be certificated, having served the nation before they can get a job in the public or private sector. But we're also lucky in the sense that they are among the most educated segment of society. They are all university graduates or HND holders. Another advantage under our own peculiar environment is that they serve essentially in places other than their places of origin. So they are not part of all these pressures and processes and influences, local influences in communities. And while they do well, there is the prospect that they will be given automatic employment by the commission. So we're very lucky indeed. But the number is not adequate given the size of the country and the number of registered voters. So while there are shortfalls, we make up with students of federal tertiary institutions. While there are shortfalls, we make up with students of state tertiary institutions. Where there are shortfalls, we make up with civil servants, basically federal employees in the states. So it's an advantage that we have to continue to engage with ad hoc staff. But once you engage them, you have to train them. And I must say that the period of training sometimes is not really adequate. It's a maximum of 3 days. You have to also consider the cost. You have to pay them for the period of training. In fact, if you look at the total cost of elections we have been conducting, 60 to 65% is spent on personnel cost.
Including this training?
Including the training, the movement of officials, the honoraria we give them, because nobody does this kind of job for God and country. People have to be remunerated. And then the transportation for movement of materials and officials to all nooks and crannies of this country.